Are you guys ready to finally finish this series? Man, like, this has been, like, one of my favorite series we've ever covered. I really love this. And I'm just, like, I'm still thinking, how the heck are the Spartans gonna win? But then again, probably the Athenians murdering, like, what, six? Or, no, there were 8 generals who participated in the battle. I think 6 were definitely killed, so, probably them killing their military, higher ups probably might come back to bite Athens. Oh well, I guess we'll find out, huh? Without any further ado, let's wrap this up.
Despite the Athenian victory at Ianoussi, the once mighty democracy was short of money and had lost many of its best generals. Sparta was considering how best to move forward after their loss at Ianoussi and their Athenian foes' rejection of their proposed peace deal after the fact. As such, it was imperative to them to work with Persia once more, whose King of Kings had by now come to see the Peloponnesian conflict as a proxy war against the pesky meddlers of Athens, who were trying to seize control of Ionia and the Hellespont from them. The Athenian rejection, according to Donald Kagan, had to do with fears of precisely this sort of restoration of relations, as the Spartans would have to continue investing resources in the war instead of regrouping with Persian assistance. But like the futility of Oedipus's parents,
so they came back. So they wanted to avoid this, and so they refused peace, but it just only led to the Spartans now actually just rejoining with the Persian. Man, Athens, man, killing your own generals, going broke, and now rejecting peace when you're in the position of strength. Man, just L's left and right. They're just stacking. You know what I mean?
trying to avoid their son, Persia was bound to get involved sooner or later. As we will recall from our previous episode, Lysander had gone to negotiate with the Persians at the court of the Shahenshah himself. He had also been in talks with many of the Peloponnesian League's member states, many of whom were Ionian cities terrified of an Athenian raid on their home turf. Driven by this fear, the Peloponnesian League cities called for a meeting in which their Spartan ringleaders could be persuaded to assist them. At this congress, which was held at Ephesus, both the Peloponnesian allies and the Persians requested Lysander to resume his role as Naval Transport Supremo, or Navarch for short. Lysander prepared a new fleet of 35 ships, and in 406 or 405 BCE, he set out from the Peloponnese to his very own Garden of Hesperides, Ephesos. Provided with a large sum of Persian money, worthy of Midas's golden touch itself, Lysander had the
Is he doubling down on, like, the frickin', like, Greek mythology references? I mean, like... Yeah, Kings and Generals, like, how many Greek mythology references can we fit into one video? It seems like he's revving them up. Am I alone in that? I don't know. He's, like, doubling down. He must have had fun writing these lines.
funds necessary to begin a process of rearmament of the Peloponnesian fleet. He also managed to secure the support of towns like Miletos, where his predecessor and rival Callicratides had tried to break up his power circles through violence and intimidation. Lysander then moved to Caria, which had sided with Athens in 412 BCE, and summarily captured it, killing its men and selling its women as slaves. He then set his sights on the strategic chokehold that everyone had been fighting over for years now, the Hellespont. In these narrow passes, where the clashing rocks failed to stop the Argonauts on their journey to Colchis, the fate of the Hellenic city-states would be decided. The Athenians had spent the better part of the year improving their navy, and had decided to set up a base in the Hellespont. Alcibiades, who was exiled there and was still alive for the time being, had come down to observe it, and declared its fortifications were inadequate. He claimed land troops were important in this situation, which previous battles in the Hellespont had clarified. In addition, he claimed that Athens would be better off setting up a base at Sestos and using help from the Thracian kings nearby. Lysander had taken the city after a storm and was now situated there. However, Conon, Philocles and Adeimantus, who were the Athenian generals in command at the Hellespont, rejected his offer as they saw it as impractical and preferred to be close to Lysander and potential reinforcements. Meanwhile, Lysander, alongside his Spartan supporter Arachus, had managed to rebuild his army and navy to its most formidable size and shape yet, with a total of 170 ships. However, his enemies had an equally formidable force, for Athens possessed 180 ships with around 36,000 men. Initially, the Athenians set out from Egopotami and went outside Lampsacus. There they formed a line of ships ready to face the mighty Lysander. However, much like Odysseus avoiding the gaze of Polyphemus, the Spartans refused to come out and fight. Growing bored of the wait, the Athenians pulled back. The pattern of going to the site and waiting in vain for Lysander's counterstrike repeated for days, as Lysander carefully gathered intelligence with his fast reconnaissance ships. The Delian League eventually became more and more careless. As it did, Lysander took advantage and performed his decisive masterstroke. However, our sources differ on how this came to be. Diodorus claims that the Athenian generals rotated daily on who would go out and try to lure out Lysander. On the fifth day, the general in charge, Philocles, went out with 30 triremes, but decided this was not enough. As such, he sent a call back to base for the rest of the ships to follow him, thus splitting the squadron that was meant to attack Lysander. We are not sure of the reasoning behind this move, although it has been speculated that it could have been a diversionary tactic, or a plan to lure the Spartans to Sestos and defeat them. Whatever the case, Lysander got wind of this through some deserters, and immediately set out to face the divided fleet, taking each squadron one by one. He first came across Philocles' flagship, and the triremes clashed. This was a quick victory for the Spartan Mothex, who then allegedly moved forward towards the European shores of the Hellespont. He met the Athenians there, who were unprepared, and set his ships on them. In Xenophon's account, Athens was in a precarious situation, as they had to travel far and wide to procure supplies. As such, on that fifth day, Lysander's scouts saw the Athenians working to find food, and saw a golden opportunity to strike.
Okay, so yeah, again, the issues with the Athenians seem to be piling up now. Obviously, separating the squadron was an issue, but now it seems like they've been caught off guard before, the Athenians, doing this exact same thing, foraging on land or doing something on land, and then their enemies catching them off guard. And then they're having to scramble, right? Like, assuming Lysander attacks now, then yeah, catching them unawares, essentially with their pants down, right? Like, that seems to work really well against the Athenians, so... That's if he does that, I'm not sure, but it seems likely, right?
They raised a shield, like Perseus hunting the Medusa, and signaled the Peloponnesians to come. Here, our sources converge as the bloodbath initiated by Lysander begins. Athens sent some ships to stall the Spartan, but he pushed through them. He then ordered his forces to secure the ships which were on the shore, and managed to capture most of them. These ships excluded Conons, who took 9 Spartan vessels as the carnage began and escaped. Soon, the troops also landed and began to hunt down the Athenians. After years of being raided by Athens, the Peloponnesian allies set about their gruesome vengeance.
Dang, that wasn't even really a battle, that was just a massacre. Like, the Athenians, despite their losses in the naval aspect, they definitely have suffered naval defeats, but for the most part, in terms of their record at naval warfare, are much higher than the Spartans, so probably it was best for the Spartans not to just have a straight-up pitched battle. Like, this probably was the best thing they could do, completely catch the enemies unawares, and essentially rob the Athenians of their greatest, strength, which is their seamanship. And once it becomes a land battle, obviously the Spartans take the reins, So, yeah, Lysander, that was a great move on his part. Completely caught the Athenians with their pants down,
3,000 Athenians were massacred, except for a general, Adimantos, either because he was a traitor or because he was the most willing to negotiate with Sparta. As for the deserter Conon, he fled to Cyprus. Athens heard of the defeat when a trireme named the Paralus appeared in the harbour of Piraeus. The citizens knew what was to come and tried to prepare accordingly by raising arms and supplies for a siege. Deprived of a costly fleet, and with the power of Sparta fast approaching, a siege of Athens was bound to occur.
Yeah, you can see just like how isolated Athens is in particular, with a lot of their naval strength and superiority now robbed. The moment this turns into a landing, the Spartans have a much greater chance since they're more in their element in that. And just look at how isolated Athens is. Once it had way more allies here, but now it's just alone. So that in loss with their like naval power, the loss they suffered under Lysander. Yeah, literally the perfect storm, you know, for everything to go wrong. Again, I do know about when we covered the first episode of this series, you know, the Athenians seem to have siegecraft much better than the Spartans and were actually more adept at it. So, unless the Spartans have evolved since then and now are great at sieges themselves, if not, they're probably gonna have to settle mainly for starving out Athens. That's if they haven't evolved, at least in that siege aspect. But yeah.
Occur. Lysander, for his part, had begun to cripple Athenian control over the Hellespont and its fertile grain farms by taking out many.
Oh crap! I remembered. Yeah, like that was their second breadbasket. Losing that, they basically they're gonna start. Holy crap! Yeah, the Hellespont was such an important thing. I just remembered. It came back to me now. Yeah, they needed to secure it so they can continue to have food. With that loss, starving out Athens, if they go that route, will be much easy. Very easy. Inevitable even, you know? Oh my.
Many of Athens' allied city-states. He also captured the Athenian stronghold of Sestos, set the men free to return to their home city, and warned the Athenians of what was to come. On the site of Decelea, where the Spartans had taken residence with King Agis, the army set out to surround Athens. The other king of Sparta, Pausanias, focused on rallying Sparta's Peloponnesian allies to raise their troops and finally storm Athens. The trap was now fully closed when Lysander gathered 200 ships and set up a blockade of Piraeus. Athens was now isolated by land and sea. The siege had begun. Knowing what had occurred when the Peloponnesian allies executed the prisoners at Agospotami, the Athenians were resolved to hold out. However, time was not on their side, for soon their supply stockpiles began to dwindle. The foot on their neck was lifted slightly when Pausanias left to return to the Peloponnese for unclear reasons, and Lysander left for Samos, where upstart Democrats were still on the loose. The latter left behind some ships, which managed to maintain the blockade. Knowing their time was running out, the Athenians sent an embassy led by Theramenes to King Agis, who was still at Decelea. Although the allies of the Peloponnese demanded the complete destruction of Athens, Agis refused to cave to their bloodthirsty request, and instead considered the offer presented to him by the Athenian ambassador. In this proposal, Athens offered to subordinate itself to Sparta, joining the Spartan alliance because they were allowed to keep their city walls. The Spartan ephors rejected this offer, enraging the Athenians and causing them to return to a politically and militarily isolated position. Some Athenians, like Archistratos, counseled that they accept further negotiations, implying that even the long walls were up for debate. But the Athenians were afraid of Sparta doing to them what Athens did to Melos, and imprisoned him. By contrast, non-capitulationists like Cleophon passed a motion banning any further negotiations with the enemy.
So now you're just gonna starve. Yeah, I mean, I can understand, like, they wanted the walls. I guess from the Spartan perspective, they're like, nah, they'll use this as an opportunity to, you know, regroup, their walls still make them strong, etc. But I also get the Athenian perspective, is that if we tear down these walls, we're probably gonna get jumped by these bloodthirsty Peloponnesian leagues. So yeah, it seems like. But then again, Athens, like, you're not really in a position to continue the war. Like, you know what I mean? Like, the most they're gonna do is starve you out. And that's not good. Yeah, this is an awful position.
However, starvation began to seep into the city, and soon the Athenians were once more desperate enough to go to the bargaining table. Theramenes went and negotiated with Lysander. He made the case that the Thebans, who were on the rise, were not to be trusted with setting terms for the negotiations. He also managed to convince the Spartan Mothax, who himself was in a politically unstable situation, to allow some constitutional autonomy to Athens. Initially, Lysander wanted to discipline the Agora by imposing a strict oligarchy with limited franchise upon them. But Theramenes convinced him it would be better to install a moderate oligarchy with a more expanded franchise based on income instead, which would be enough to contain Athenian democracy's unpredictable politics and bold foreign policy adventures. As such, despite the hardline demands of Corinth and Thebes to destroy the city, a harsh but comparatively less brutal peace was agreed to. Sparta considered Athens' past contributions during the Persian invasions decades before to have made them worthy of both mercy and of consideration, and as such, the blockade was finally lifted and Athens surrendered to the Peloponnesian army.
Holy crap. Again, I'm still amazed by the level-headedness and restraint that the Spartans have demonstrated throughout this entire series. Like I said, popular ideas, warrior race, I'd expect them to be the most bloodthirsty, aggressive people in the world, but they've practiced a lot of temperance in this series, while the Athenians were the overly aggressive ones. So it's definitely given me, this whole series has given me a different perspective of the Spartans and Athenians that I originally didn't have, you know? And, yeah, that's good that, Athens managed to use negotiations to make this awful situation a little less awful than it could have been, So, again, that's probably the best they could have done in such dire straits, so... Yeah, but essentially they've lost, they've given up, they've thrown in the towel, as it were, And, this should cause, like, Spartan hegemony,
Sparta's terms were targeted and specific, and while moderate compared to Thebes and Corinth's ideas of vengeance, they must have still been exceptionally humiliating to the proud Athenians, especially when they had to endure watching Lysander landing into Piraeus and demolishing the walls. Athens was to remain an independent city, but it was to fully embed itself into the Spartan sphere of influence and alliance system. The Athenians were allowed to keep the Patrios Politeia.
Wow, and just look at that, man. Spartan hegemony, and all this influence from Athens is just gone between Sparta and Persia. That's insane. I just love how Crete has just been chilling the entire time, its own little thing here. I just love that,
Or ancient constitution, which played a key role in Theramenes' ability to get Athens to accept the deal, as any of the city's factions could see it as a preservation of their democracy. Athens was also to have its navy reduced to 12 ships. Moreover, exiles from the city were to return and be reintegrated into Athenian society. We cannot know what the Athenians thought about this arrangement, but we know that Theramenes used his rapport with the Spartans to install himself as one of the 30 tyrants, a short-lived dictatorial regime which took over Athens after the war's end at Sparta's behest. These 30 tyrants were keen on controlling the opposition and began a reign of terror by scratching away the democratic laws in the royal stoa of the Athenian agora. Critias.
Yeah, to say that these peace terms, granted, it prevented from a possible complete destruction of Athens, but still very humiliating in its own right, right? Like, especially the Athenians, who were so aggressive and bold throughout this entire series. This is essentially a lot of humble pie that they're having to eat, you know? And they could have had peace earlier, like after the major decisive battle pre-Lysander's victory at the Hellespont. The Spartans wanted peace. So that's the thing, the Athenians could have had peace in probably a stronger position, but they kept going. And, you know, sometimes you gotta know when to cut your losses, right? And just be like, okay, I've won, let me make peace and, you know, at a position of strength. You know, like Napoleon was good at that when he was facing enemies. When they offered peace, he would always be like, heck yeah, first offer, he'll be there. Granted, he dictated the terms, obviously, from a position of strength, but you know what I mean. That's probably the most ideal. You know, sometimes you could end up like Charles of Sweden and just keep pushing a war, and then eventually fortune will turn on you in an instant, as we've seen throughout warfare. And it turned on the Athenians big time. So, yeah.
Was particularly cruel, causing many to despise the new government. Athens' tradition of protest and revolt reared up once more, for the tyrant's rule lasted only about a year. Eventually, many democrats, like a triarch called Thrasybulus, rose in revolt from exile and fought bitterly until they restored the fabled Athenian democracy. This civil war, known to us as the Phyle Campaign, began as follows. The 30 tyrants had only left the franchise to the so-called 3000, and had begun to target democrats and metics. As a result, a steady flow of exiles gathered in Thebes around Thrasybulus, whose reputation in the Peloponnesian War had made him popular with loyalists. Thrasybulus, alongside his comrade Anytos, was determined to find ways to restore democracy in Athens. As such, the two of them, like Athenian versions of Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, set forth with only 70 loyalist democrats and marched into Athenian territory in the fort of Phyle. The tyrants, alarmed at the democratic force coming so quickly into their territory being a magnet for subversive activity, began to mobilize the 3000. The vanguard force marched up onto Phyle and set camp outside the fortress to try and take it. An initial attack by part of the tyrant's force was easily repelled by the rebels. The 30 tyrants arrived later and began preparations for a siege. However, this was happening during the winter of 404 BCE, and they became stuck in a snowstorm. The daring democrats actually managed to send part of their force out and harass the tyrannic forces, forcing them to retreat. From there, the tyrants summoned forces from the Spartan contingent at Athens, led by Calabios, and alongside them and 2 divisions of Athenian cavalry, they set forth. They found a fort near the one at Phyle and began to block access to farmland that could be used for farming by the Democrats. In the meantime, Thrasybulus' force was increasing and had reached 700 men, and he was determined to keep his advantage. At nightfall, they left the fortress and reached the Spartan tyrant fort. At dawn, as the men were waking, they struck by attacking the fort. The Spartans were caught by surprise, and many of them were killed. The rest fled alongside the surviving Athenian cavalry.
Dang, I did not expect this whole Democrat versus Tyrant section of the video to start, but dang, man. That is beyond interesting.
Thrasybulus erected a trophy at the site and went back to Phyle. The 30 were beginning to be anxious. The revolt was gaining strength, as Thrasybulus had now amassed 1,000 men. They tried to get him to come to the dark side and join their ranks, but he rebuked them.
My allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy! I'm sorry. Star Wars.
The 30 also prepared a Dr. Evil-style refuge bunker at the settlement of Eleusis, where the famous Eleusinian mysteries took place. Thrasybulus, for his part, was growing bolder in his aims. The Democrats knew that Piraeus, Athens' famous port, was now unfortified after the long walls were taken down, and that many Democrats were exiled there. The port, with its low-wage working population and cosmopolitanism, was a hotbed of radical democracy, making it the ideal spot for them to gain a foothold for restoring the noble polity. As such, the stage for the Battle of Munichia was set. Here, as usual, Diodorus and Xenophon provide us with different accounts of the prelude to the battle. Diodorus says that the 30 set up camp in a fort at Akane near Piraeus, and the marching Democrats found them and defeated them, causing their retreat. For Xenophon, the Democrats captured the port at night, and, realizing that defending the city would spread them out too thin, decided to march out. In both cases, they took up positions on the hill of Munichia near Piraeus, and the battle commenced. We do not have much from the account of Diodorus, so then we will focus on that of Xenophon. As it happened, the tyrants built up a line of 50 ranks at a market in Hippodamos, and began to march up the hill. The Democrats had a line 10 ranks deep, with the light troops and spear throwers in the back lines. As the tyrants began to move up the hill, Thrasybulos ordered them not to attack, as his seer had told him not to move until either he or Thrasybulos were killed or wounded. Soon the seer was attacked and entered the fields of Elysium, and Thrasybulos ordered a charge down the hill. The attack broke into the oligarchic lines and pushed through, even killing 2 of the tyrants, Critias and Hippomachos. After the battle, the 30 were deposed by the 3,000, and a council of 10, one from each tribe, was assembled in their place. Only 2 of the 30 were in that council, with the rest fleeing to Eleusis. In the meantime, Sparta was scrambling to take control of the situation, stuck between recognizing the 30 or the 10 as a legitimate government.
Yeah, I was thinking, what the heck is Sparta thinking about this whole situation? I was wondering that while Athens is having a civil war, and I think the 30 war, obviously kind of a part of the peace negotiation deal aftermath, if you would. Of that. I'm just thinking, what's Sparta thinking of this whole situation going down? I guess we'll find out.
As both had sent them emissaries. 2 major players were vying for control, Lysander, who had set up the 30, and Pausanias, one of the 2 kings. Lysander was initially appointed Harmost and set out to Eleusis, beginning mobilization alongside the 30. Pausanias later lobbied for and was granted a force of various Peloponnesian forces by 3 of the 5 ephors of Sparta, with Thebes and Corinth refusing to send troops out of fear of Sparta becoming too powerful. Pausanias arrived at Attica, and a grumbling Lysander was forced to join him. The Spartans took positions outside Piraeus, Pausanias on the right flank and Lysander on the left flank. Pausanias began with a move of diplomacy, asking the rebels to disperse. When this was rebuked, he launched an attack, weakened their defences, and then retreated. The next day, he went on reconnaissance to see if a siege wall was practical, but the Democrats sent raids to try and stop him. Pausanias used his hoplites to push them back, and killed 30 of them, then followed the rest into Piraeus. There, the rest of the Democratic forces were preparing and arming. They managed to push the Spartans back, killing some of the commanders, including an Olympic champion called Lacrates. Thrasybulos formed 8 ranks with his hoplites and began to move forward. Pausanias retreated and united his forces into one. Forming a much deeper formation, he pushed forward on the Democrats, who chose a last stand. The Democrats fought valiantly, but lost, and were forced to retreat. They had lost 150 men in total, while the Spartans lost only 13.
Oh! Holy crap. Yeah, throw in the towel, dude. Sparta now... Holy crap.
Pausanias was a defensive man in terms of foreign policy, so he reached out once more with his offer of diplomacy. Both the 10 and the Democrats sent emissaries to Sparta, where a negotiated settlement was reached. Democracy would be restored, and a general pardon would be offered to all except the 30 tyrants and their most egregious collaborators. The remnants of the tyrants remained free at Eleusis, and tried to organize a mercenary army, but were discovered, and the Democrats launched an assault, squashing the authoritarians once and for all. Pausanias was tried for his actions after sycophancy by Lysander, but was acquitted. Although Athens had preserved its political identity, Sparta was now the undisputed grand superpower of Hellas, but this would not last long. Sparta.
Yep, as we know, Thebes eventually is like, you know what, we're gonna break you, Sparta. And that's what they do. With their sacred band, of course. We can't forget them. Yeah, I think the Spartan hegemony of Greece was like, what, 10 years? Like a decade, I've heard? Like, it wasn't that long in the grand scheme of things. You know?
Sparta's constitution was suited to an isolated state needing social harmony. It was not suited to running an empire. Soon, many allies like Corinth and Thebes began to break away. Eager to maintain its status as top dog, Sparta soon began to terrorize upstart states like Elis, and to try to recover its reputation as the champions of the Hellenic world, which had been tarnished due to their alliance with Persia.
Yeah, that's a big one, right? Like, Athens and Sparta at the beginning of the war were renowned for their contributions for stopping the Persian invasion, yet Sparta needed to team up with Persia, so that's kind of a really bad look. And also, I know that Spartans are kind of isolationist. They were always kind of like a weird bunch in among the Greeks. So all that, it's like, yeah, you're not suited for like ruling an empire. And then there's like the frickin' their aggressive retaliation to prove their dominance now. Just, yeah, you could see why they didn't last too long, huh?
To that end, under the reign of King Agesilaus, Sparta began to campaign in Asia Minor. Thebes eventually grew as a power and expanded its influence throughout Hellas, a trajectory seen since the final years of the Peloponnesian War. Ironically, in the Corinthian War of 395 to 387 BCE, four unlikely allies, Thebes, Argos, Athens, and Corinth, came together with the help of the Achaemenid Empire to fight off the Spartans, resulting in a conflict which ended in a stalemate. However, after this, Athens regained its long walls and became a major power once more, though never an empire like before. Thebes would eventually become its own small empire, but this was an ephemeral victory. Soon, from the northern plains of Macedon, the Argead dynasty would grow.
Yep. And then Philip came and took it all. Conquered all of Greece.
And, through far more prudent diplomacy, become a pan-Hellenic superpower. Ironically, this kingdom, that was only a side actor in the Peloponnesian War, and one considered backwater and barbaric by the rest of Hellas, became the leader of Hellas, but such is the unpredictability of geopolitics.
Yep, that's what Macedon did, man. Like, the genius of Philip and Alexander united Greece, you know? Granted, Sparta was ignored for a long time. But, you know, yeah, it's just amazing. The constant shifting of Greece is just interesting on its own, you know?
Overall, the Peloponnesian War had a devastating effect on the city-states of Greece. Places like Megara or Athens had severe economic losses in revenue and agricultural output. After catastrophic wartime losses, cities like Corinth had far fewer men for their hoplite phalanxes going forward. However, these pale compared to cities like Plataea and Melos, which had their whole populations executed and enslaved. War is a cruel affair, and was particularly so in ancient Greece, and we can imagine Athena and Ares wrestling over the fates of the cities, while the three fates weaved and cut the lines of myriad lives. A sort of implicit factionalism arose throughout Greece as oligarchs and democrats fought repeatedly in cities. Scholars have debated the geopolitical lessons of the Peloponnesian War. Civil strife, which often made or broke cities, has been highlighted by some, especially in terms of Athens, where everything was debated. This has led some modern commentators to question how efficient a democracy can be when at war. This criticism is refuted by others, who point out how Athens survived and even thrived after major losses, such as Syracuse, and even after its final defeat in the war. Either way, the Peloponnesian War has become a quintessential study in geopolitics, with its shifting alliances, chaotic battles, and epic Souvlaki and Heros cook-offs between Iphors and Strategy. Thucydides himself, the historian whose sources we have mostly relied on, has gained an incredible reputation as a scientifically minded and rigorous historian. His goal, to make the conflict a ktema esai, or eternal possession, has defined history and how we perceive war. Discussions on his realpolitik views and whether he favoured realism in geopolitics, or ached for a world system in which the excesses of war were to be avoided, are still debated by classicists and historians and political scientists. We can claim that he has gained himself a spot amongst the stars of history, with historians like Sima Qian, Ibn Khaldun, or Garcilaso de la Vega, El Inca. And thus our story of the Peloponnesian War ends, not as an Odyssean return to Ithaca or a Dionysian return from India, but as a boulder raised by Sisyphus only to drop once more. Tragic poets like Euripides, who lived during this period, have commented on the nature of war and how the Olympians caused wars. In this twist on the Iliad's myth with its aristocratic morals, the Trojan War was caused not by Helen of Troy, but by the Olympians, who used a cloud eidolon of her to go to Troy, killing thousands and putting eternal blame on her while she is kidnapped in Egypt. In truth, the war was a geopolitical event with many lessons for today, and Thucydides seems to have been atheistic in his conception of war and peace. Nevertheless, we may wish to end this video with two reflections, one by Euripides' tragic play Helen, in which he writes, "How variable is the nature of gods, eh? How inscrutable! They change the fate of mortals from good to bad, from one minute to the next. No man's fate is certain." The other comes from a modern Greek poet, George Seferis, who in his poem called Helen, after Euripides' play, recites, "Scamander is not destined to hear from messengers coming to announce that all this suffering and all these lives were sent to the abyss for an empty shirt, for a Helen." And thus, our story ends. More videos on ancient Greek warfare are coming, so make sure you are subscribed and press the bell button. These long videos are difficult to make, so please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing. It helps immensely. Recently, we have started releasing weekly
Alright, so he's done. And I have to say, another brilliant series by the great kings and generals. You know, I just do find the Greeks so fascinating, and the geopolitical landscape of just ancient classical Greece, how it constantly evolved, the alliances, the battles, just everything is just so fascinating about this region. I find it probably the most fascinating in world history, and I'm glad to have looked at it. And yeah, overall, like, I knew the outcome, but getting there was definitely the fun part of the journey. Finally filling in the gaps and learning exactly how it all went down. Again, that's always been my favorite part of watching all these historical videos, and I can't wait to watch even more down the line. So I'm going to end the video right here. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Until then, bye everyone.